Hello, my name is Robert Gannon, and this is Sketching Details presents Spookier Times. Horror, Gothic, and weird fiction across media. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Robert Gannon. I am the editor of the entertainment media criticism website, sketchingdetails.com. I have been a professional media critic for 16 years. And my earliest weird fiction professional publication comes in at 19 years ago now. My focus has always been on horror, science fiction, fantasy, gothic, weird fiction, however you want to categorize it. And a big question I always got when I was starting out was, why this? Why not? Horror specifically is a hard one to get right. At its core, horror is the exploration of the things that scare us in society, taken into a safer context. The character on the page, on the screen, in the podcast, on stage, can't hurt you. The scenario can't actually hurt you, but it plays off of stuff that we're afraid of. So as we launch into this bi-weekly podcast, videocast, however you're watching it, we want to examine the world of horror and gothic and weird fiction and genre fiction in a way that puts it in the context of its time and in our society. I am recording the first episode of this on my 35th birthday. I've wanted to do this project for years now, and I just needed to find a way to make it work up here. So to start out, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite weird horror films that I go back to again and again and can find new meaning and joy in. In 2005, Japanese horror director Sion Sono released a sequel to the cult hit Suicide Club. Suicide Club is a hot-button film that became notorious for its opening sequence featuring an entire group of young people jumping in front of a moving train. It is a very dark, bitter satire about the value of life and community in society in the growing digital age. Essentially, disillusioned people all across Japan find this website for the Suicide Club. And the people trying to investigate what's causing all these mass public suicides discover that the blinking light pattern on the website tells you how many people are going to die next. And there's all kinds of hidden mysteries and levels in it, and exploration of the fear of the dark web and trying to find a community or a family that makes sense to you, and the damaging effects of sensationalizing this kind of case in the media. It is one of the hardest horror films you can watch, but also incredibly rewarding if you can get through it. It is a difficult watch. Not going to lie about that. Not going to sugarcoat that. 2005, Sion Sono released a sequel called Noriko's Dinner Table. He intended the Suicide Club idea to be a trilogy with 3 films all connected to each other to this world, but not necessarily telling a linear story. Noriko's Dinner Table follows a teenage girl who finds the Suicide Club website. Everyone knows about it. It's been all over the news. The massive attack has already happened that started the third act, ended the main story of Suicide Club. And she clicks around on the website and she finds a message board that most people don't get to. Most people stop at this greeting site that tells them where to meet to learn more about the club. She got to the message board that gets into the truth of what's happening here. And she befriends another young person on the other side of Japan that says, run away and join me. You'll have a family here. You'll have a job. You'll have everything you want. So she does. She abandons her whole life on a whim based on something she read on the internet and travels across Japan. When she arrives, she meets her friend at a train station and is immediately thrown into her new life. This teenager is now, well, she's a professional actor of sorts. She gets hired by families of people who are grieving loss to step in and play the role of a daughter or a niece or a granddaughter who died or moved away. In all these situations of people who are either grieving the actual loss of a loved one or dealing with separation because of travel or divorce or any other kinds of things. And she finds all these different families that she fits in with, that she gets to live with for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. And then the clock runs out and she collects her money and she leaves and she's herself again. She actually discovers she really doesn't know much about her friend or her new coworkers. You learn something when you play and improv in this kind of scene, but she's not the sister or the niece or the cousin. She's a stranger to them. And she's a stranger to these people. And she becomes more and more comfortable creating all these alternate identities instead of finding out who she is herself. Worse still, her family starts to follow her one by one and try and find out where she went. And they also become employed by this same company, this mysterious company trying to connect people together through the illusion of still having contact with their families. And they meet in person and circle around each other again and again and have to pretend to be a family that's not their own family. Noriko's Dinner Table is one of my favorite horror films for a lot of reasons. The quality of production is stellar from top to bottom. I think it's Sion Sono's best film, which is a shame that it's not as well known as Suicide Club. But that's what happens sometimes. The big cult one comes out, everyone kind of finds out about it, it gains a reputation, and not everyone's like me and has to see what comes next. 2, the acting is wonderful. Everyone is so great, and they have to slip in and out of so many different characters throughout this story. It's kind of unbelievable what they accomplish. And 3rd, it actually provides, without even being a direct sequel and barely even referencing what happens in the first film, it provides so much closure to the inherently negative, almost dystopian tone of Suicide Club. Because this mysterious website that pushed all those people to die by suicide in the first film also builds community and helps people who are grieving. And how did these people disappear? And is it connected? And the mysteries are unsolved. As far as I know, the 3rd film was never made. There may have been a light novel or a novel released very briefly that told another part of the story completely unrelated. And he has this film that came out a few years later that's all about a teenage girl who winds up shifting through different realities in a deadly game of hide and seek with her classmates. That's kind of a spiritual sequel, but isn't really a 3rd film. It just winds up being the themes that Sion Sono wants to cover. Community, connection in the digital age, and finding your true identity. One thing I want to include in all of these episodes is some piece of short fiction or art or something for you to get a different perspective on how these same kind of themes can play out. So today, in this episode, I'm going to read through one of my favorite short stories I've ever published called By Rote. It's available in a 2-part collection on Amazon. Its full title is By Rote, A Lie in 2 Acts. This is the actual story. The second story is the story about how I was... It's the story about how someone tried to manipulate me into lying about a Gothic fantasy story, a Gothic horror, however you want to view it, and treating it as reality to get a bigger byline. By Rote, by Robert Gannon. The whispers are what get to you. People just don't realize that marble floors and tiled walls amplify everything. This is why the organ is on carpet and the younger altar boys wear sneakers under their oversized vestments. You think some of the comments would be shocking, but you get used to them. They aren't any different than what is said outside of the church. There are worse gigs, I suppose, than playing the funeral mass. It takes some getting used to. Music is the last thing in the plans of grieving parishioners. They don't care how well you play the music. That's not their concern. They just know they're supposed to have it. It's tradition. A standard cropping of hymns sets the expected tone. Taken out of context, the usual subjects don't seem particularly somber. They're hopeful, even joyous. A true musician understands that the tone of the song changes to reflect the occasion. The voice is rolled into the darker colors from the back of the throat and stays true to the melody to complement the straight and sparse organ arrangement. The requests are always the same. I don't know what I'd do if the family request is something other than a combination of Ave Maria, Amazing Grace, and On Eagle's Wings. By Rote, the next of kin lists the same program every time. If they don't know the name of the song, they recognize the lyrics or melody as what they should have known. The only variation is that they want a male or female singer for the Mass. Everybody always thinks they know more than the singer. Even if they've never sung a right note in their lives, they suddenly become an expert during a funeral Mass. Every Matthew, Mary, and Luke is suddenly transformed into Pavarotti, Carlotta, and Farinelli when there's a dead body in the way. I guess I can't blame them too much. It's an awkward situation. There's an elephant in the room, the big wooden box, that everyone can see, but no one wants to. The musician seems like the only expendable element. You need the priest and the church, the group of well-wishers, and the organization of the ceremony to breed familiarity with the great unknown. But the lowly musician? There's always someone better than the man at the organ. I'd like to think I've developed armor against the whispers. A sense of detachment is almost required for the job. The music is moving enough without the added stress of identifying with the grieving. I think there are worse things that I could do than have notes marked in the score from when I look up, when I sigh, and when I shed a tear. It's no different than filling in for a pit orchestra or playing for auditions. I slap on the right mask, do the job, and get paid. The only difference is where the whispers happen. I have one rule to protect me from giving up for good. I never perform the music for my own family and friends. There are no exceptions. I did not perform for my grandmother, or my favorite teacher, or my best friend. I would not have made it through the Mass. I've been hounded with everything from, it's your job to honor her memory, to, his last wish was for you to sing at his funeral. I've yet to find truth in what they always say. The motivation for lying in these cases isn't malicious. These people just know that someone has to do the job. So why not toss the paycheck to someone they know? To them, it's no different than asking their nephew, the plumber, to fix a leaky sink. The sad thing is how often I wish I was sitting at the keys during these more intimate occasions. I always escape to the music. I follow the score in my mind. I know every page turn by heart. My feet glide to the right pedal in perfect unison with the musician collecting my paycheck. I grade the performance on accuracy and interpretation, noting all slips and extraneous ornamentation with the muscular memory of my fingers dancing on the hymnal. Then I look up and remember the woman at the organ is my former teacher, or the singer had me play for his last 2 concerts. I'm the person who suggested them for the job. I'm the one who convinced my cousin or uncle or a neighbor they would do a beautiful job. At least I'm not whispering. If your average church worth playing at used the piano, the whispers wouldn't be as big a distraction. You really only need to know where your hands have to land on the 88 keys and how you can turn the page without ruining the song. The organ is a beautiful, thankless beast of an instrument. On a smaller one, you're working with at least 3 keyboards. 2 for the hands, 1 for the feet. If you want to work consistently, you learn to pump the pedals. The pedals are the key to all sacred music. There's a strength to the bass tones that appeals to some ingrained desire in humanity. It is a force felt throughout the body, shooting up from the feet straight to the head and resting in the heart. The music is wrong without it. It's hollow, empty, a shell of what it should be. That force is what drives a musician to be better. It is power over life itself. If you control the hearts and minds of an audience, you control your own musical destiny. This would be fulfilling in any other venue. At a funeral, the music is overwhelmed by the emotion. It's not possible to look out and see a captivated audience clinging to every note. Their eyes wander to the box laid upon the altar. That is when the whispers start. Some of the comments are innocent enough. I can accept "how long is this song?" as a valid question. I don't want to work this job any longer than I have to. If it moves too slowly, my mind wanders, my technique falters, and I begin to break away from my practice demeanor. I can get past "this old song" or "how old-fashioned" because I agree. There is a wealth of underused hymns and composed masses that are far more profound than the trinity of funeral songs. The risk of dreaming is the realization that I'm only performing because I'm needed, not because I'm wanted. It only gets worse as the Mass goes on. The priest has spoken and acknowledged the life and the legacy. I can turn to any face in the church and read the sorrowful recollection of the lost that each person believes is unmatched by anyone else. I start the second song and immediately hear "not again," followed by a canon of "the last singer was better. I can't stand his voice. This guy can't sing. Who hired him?" I know they don't actually hate me. This is just part of the job. They all say the same things about everyone else who sits on the organ bench. I've seen this. This doesn't make hearing it any easier. The worst of it is personal. Someone will inevitably attack me on my rule. Did you know how he refused to sing for his grandfather? What a horrible person. He wouldn't play for his neighbor, but he'll play for a total stranger. The armor starts to break down then. Who are they to judge me for how I do my job? They know what I've been through. They have. The ones that cause trouble are always the ones who saw what happened the only time I broke the rule. My mother passed away 5 years ago. She did ask me to sing for her funeral. I would never turn down a wish directly from someone I loved so much. I told her I would sing one song for her service. My best friend would accompany me, and my former teacher would cover the rest. She was satisfied with my plan, and that was all that should have mattered. As soon as the procession began, I could see the judgment in their eyes. Why wasn't I performing the music? I hoped I was just imagining this. I wasn't. Their words quickly matched my suspicions. He won't even sing for her? I couldn't walk in with the armor that day. That wasn't a choice. If I remained distant and professional, I'd never have another job in my own parish. The priest had competition for attention that day. Even he noticed where the attention was focused. The man at the organ was sitting in the pews, eyes frozen on the box he never acknowledged. His face hung blank. His feet didn't slide and his fingers didn't bend. The changes didn't go unnoticed. He can cry for total strangers, but not for his own mother. It was my turn to sing. I couldn't even distinguish the whispers from each other. It was Judgment Day. I nodded at my friend and he began to play. The whispers stopped. I wish they hadn't. My voice slipped out of my mouth, falling toward the congregation. I could barely open my mouth. I felt paralyzed as if injected by Novocaine. My body locked up. I struggled to breathe. Not even the tears could thaw my frozen joints. There was no life in this music. I stumbled away from the organ and sat in the pew. I hadn't even sung one chorus of the hymn. That's it. How unprofessional. Why did he even try? The other guy was much better. I'd never hire him. He can't even sing. I knew he wouldn't do it. Horrible. Bad. Worthless. But they always act nice in the end. Without fail, some members of the family or a close friend will invite you to rejoin the group after the burial for a bite to eat. They will hand you a thank you note with a tip hidden inside and leave you to clean up your gear. The ones who whispered will always fawn over how talented you are, what a beautiful voice you have, or how much you move them with your performance while balancing a plate of food from a warming tray. They'll let you know if their niece or their cousin is getting married and how they'd love you to sing for the service. They'll shake your hand or kiss your cheek and thank you for doing so well. They know their parts by heart. Then you walk away and wait for the next job. That was my original story by Rote. It was published in 2014 in the two-part collection by Rote, A Lie in Two Acts, available now on Amazon. Last up, I want to talk to you about a couple recommendations I have for new media you can try out and enjoy on your own. First up is a new horror film on Netflix called 1BR. This is what I've started calling an apartment Gothic film, meaning a young person moves into an apartment complex that seems like their dream home, but there's all kinds of secrets hidden around them. The apartment replaces the mansion in the modern Gothic. And it's really quite a fascinating transformation I'm working on larger pieces on. Anyway, in 1BR, a young woman escapes an abusive household and moves across country and finds her dream apartment in this beautiful community where everyone cares about her. And then one night, someone breaks in, kidnaps her, and before she goes unconscious, she realizes it's her neighbor. It's all her neighbors. And they are going to make her a perfect model citizen by any means necessary. It's a 90-minute horror film. It's really good. I put it on the same level as The Master or Her, in this style of like obsession with the new space and being changed by the people around you. It's really good. I'm also going to recommend a short story collection for you that I found recently and fell head over heels for. It is called Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This came out in 2018, and it is a collection of short genre stories, some horror, some sci-fi, some dystopian, some gothic, that are playing on old themes we hear about a lot over and over again in literature and history and culture. The top story in the collection for me is the one that opens it up. It is a woman talking about her whole life from beginning to end through the lens of the stories she reads or tells her children. And the one detail you cannot ignore is the green ribbon around her neck that she says no one else, not even her own child, is allowed to touch. It is a reinvention of all the classic fairy tales that Machado could fit into this story through a distinctly feminist lens. The women who are trapped or hunted or tricked or bewitched are the heroes who save themselves and fight against oppression at every turn, brought on by the arbitrary rules of society. And she is one of them. The whole collection is fascinating. There's one story that freaked me out because it's a dystopian story about an epidemic that turns into a pandemic where the disease is contracted by people being in too close proximity to each other. And the way the survivors stay safe is to make people quarantine outside of their safe home until they know whatever the illness is not taking hold. It's a wonderful short story collection. It is thrilling. It is exciting. It is body positive. It is representation every way you can imagine. And it's the kind of fiction we should be discussing more. I'm Robert Gannon. You can follow more of my work at sketchingdetails.com. You can also find me on social media at Robert J. Gannon, every platform you can imagine. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.